So I started with plans from the Haynes Roadster book, but ended up modifying those significantly because I used MX5 running gear. So this is the plans and info book that I ended up making. Really helpful to make a parts sheet so you can go back and replace things when they do wear out. Weights, hydraulics, things like that, and then just a ton of hand drawings, photos, lists, some other plans. So I kind of put together, these are some of the drawings, a book, if you will, of the build. And so this is just an informational book that I can go back and review as I need to. And it helped along the way as well. This is what I organized mostly for registration and then for my own records, but it's basically, again, the same info sheet, some photos of VIN numbers and part numbers and things like that. And then I went through and tabbed build material, suspension, brakes, body, electrical. All of these are essentially my receipts. So you've got essentially receipts for everything that went into the build, and it turned into this book that is a lot bigger than I'd hoped it would be at the start, because you realize how much money you spend on one of these projects. So, you know, I've heard the term low cost, not true. And then for wiring itself, I ended up doing an entire book on its own of wiring that uses the MX5 factory manual and a spreadsheet that I put together that just kind of discusses each ECU output, where it goes, color, notes, and that really helped because I essentially cut and spliced the entire thing for the MX5 side, and I divorced the chassis from the engine. So the notes were really helpful, and if I ever need to refer to it to troubleshoot or anything, these are each plug I kind of worked through, and then there's plugs for the ECUs and so on and so forth. So entire book on its own of electrical, and I was really happy with the way that turned out. The electrical was actually one of my most daunting projects and ended up being one of my favorites during the build. So that's the books that started the whole thing. Here's the car with no nose cone, no bonnet, so I can kind of walk you through the engine detail, discuss what we've got going on in the car, and then I'll show you it all buttoned up. So it's a 1.6 liter MX5 or Miata base engine with ARP fasteners, standard pistons, rods, crank. It's got a T3 turbo. The specs on that T3 are it's a 50 trim with a .48 on the turbine side AR, and then the compressor side AR is .42. So real small because I wanted it to be able to boost quickly, and it does, and I ended up right around 10 to 11 PSI at full boost when it's cool out, and that's really happy. I'm really happy with the way that feels. No lag at all. And I did port the wastegate so that I don't get any boost creep, and ended up porting the turbine as well to match the manifold. It has an electronic boost control, which is mounted right there. And it's an IAT, intake air temp, and map sensor. So it's converted from the original Miata mass airflow to speed density. It's got 440cc fuel injectors that are actually Mazda parts that I rebuilt. The radiator is an aluminum radiator that was originally made for the Civic, and that seems to be working really well. I'll see during the heat of summer. I've only driven it a couple times in anger so far. Obviously intercooled. The manifold for the turbo is a cast iron unit, log type manifold. I ended up reliefing it, which you can kind of see in there. See those relief cuts? And that was to avoid cracking. And then I ported it as well to match the turbine porting that I did, and just cleaned it up a little bit. It has an HKS SSQV blow-off valve, just kind of buried down here. That works pretty well. Sounds cool. The whole thing's tied together with a Mega Squirt MS2 that's a plug and play for the Miata. The downpipe is 2.5 inches. I TIG welded that. It's stainless, and that goes into a MagnaFlow muffler. Has a flying Miata clutch and flywheel setup. I have the OBP pedal assembly, which is kind of buried down there. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but that has a dual master cylinder setup and a proportion or bias bar. Using a Torsen 1.8 liter Miata differential. And I do have the K-Miata reinforcement plate on there. I did that before I got my TIG welder, but I'm happy with it, so I left it. It's kind of thick aluminum piece bolted through. And what that does is keeps this relief that's designed for if the car is in an accident, cracking the ear so that it doesn't damage everything else and run you guys into the passenger compartment. But what we want is to stiffen this because it's a known crack weak point in the diff when you start adding power to these. So that's what I've done is reinforce that area. You can also see the diff mount, the way that was designed, really, really stiff. That's really important on these. A lot of failures on some of the designs that people have used for the differential mount. But this one works really well. I'm using for suspension Protex. And those are custom valved and custom sprung coilovers from the UK. And basically you fill out a sheet and tell them what specs you'd like and they build them for you. So really nice. They're adjustable for rebound. You can see the knob there on the front lower, which is kind of cool. The brakes are 1.8 MX5 Miata brakes, and I'm using Hawk HPS pads because I'm going to plan on autocrossing it initially, and those have a good heat up pretty quickly, which is what you want for autocrossing. The wheels, I've gotten a lot of questions on those, and I did some research. They're original work equips. I think they're equip 3s. But they came with my donor, which was a huge score if you want to Google how much those things cost. They're big bucks. And they're really lightweight. They're 15x7s. The front and rear wishbones are Heim jointed. You can see that, so I can adjust caster and camber and toe on the back of the toe. And unequal length A-arms in the rear with independent rear suspension. Obviously quite a departure from Caterhams and 7s, except for the very latest Caterhams. The bodywork some of it came from Kit Car Direct, which is MK in the UK. So the rear boot, the rear fenders, the scuttle, the front wings, which are carbon and are really, really light. I can't even express, you pick them up and they feel like a feather. And the wide mouth nose cone, which I'll show you once we got the bodywork back buttoned up. That all came from the UK. The toughest part of that was actually the shipping cost from the UK, but really nice parts. I'm happy with those. The lights are actually Caterham units. I think they're 5 3/4 inch, if I remember right. Same with the rear. I've got rear Caterham, the older style Caterham lights. Now they've got those new trick looking LED ones. The gauges on the interior are Speed Hut. And I had those custom built. You used to be able to do more, but they still have quite a bit of custom capability. So you can basically choose your font, color, bezel style, all kinds of cool stuff, and which gauges you'd like. And then the lower gauges are AEM because that's the fuel air-fuel ratio that I ended up using. So my boost gauge and air-fuel ratio are both AEM. Has a mounting steering wheel right there, which actually has a story behind it. It came from my classic Mini when I got a Motolita for my birthday one year, and I kept that. So that sat on our wall as a decoration for a long time, and I wanted to reuse it. So got the correct MX5 Boss for a mounting steering wheel, cleaned it up a little, and found, I think it was Etsy, that had these little Super 7 decals that was the right size. And so I ended up putting that on the car. Really happy with that. I do plan to make a Boss of some sort that'll tie this together just to clean that up a little, that little area. The switches came from Billet Automotive. or billet buttons rather, and they're in Australia, but I was really happy with those. And then that big billet knob there is from Quickwire, and that's the headlight switch, along with toggles for the hazards and the turn signal. So, the seats were originally 914 seats that I had. I've had, I think, 5 of those, 914s. I wish I had one of them still. And the headrests were cut off and then custom upholstered in a houndstooth pattern, which I really wanted in this car. And I really love houndstooth and think it looks pretty very classic, the way they worked. I also had seat heaters installed, as this car has no HVAC of any kind, no AC, no heat, nothing. So that makes it really nice, and they heat up quick, and there's actually 2 settings, so that worked out really well. The rear view mirror is just a hot rod pedestal mirror, and I think that looks really nice too. That kind of the original mirror I got was from Speedway Motors, and it didn't fit. The angle on the windshield was wrong, so this one I think actually looks a little more classic, mounted on the scuttle anyway. So really happy with the way that turned out, and it does have a little bit of a warp look to it when you look through it. I don't know if it'll come out on the camera, but I'm going to see how that works. It's just not perfect, but still looks like it'll work pretty well for me. The rear view mirrors are a Spa Formula Car mirror that mount to the windshield stanchions. And so far so good. I've actually driven it with those in place on a closed course with a professional driver, and they work really well, so happy with that. No vibration or anything, which is what I was worried about. So then the electrical stuff, like I said, was one of my favorite parts. There's the factory Mazda engine side, and that's what controls the engine. And then I've got a Quickwire harness, which you can't really see, it's up under the dash, for the chassis. So totally divorced, powered separately, everything is separate. That actually worked out really, really well, and I think the later Miatas went to that. This is originally the donor was a 1993, so shortened it quite a bit, the wiring, from the original Mazda, and I've actually got an entire crate of wiring left over that came out of the original donor car, and then as well as the shortened wiring from Quickwire. So again, that worked out really well. The battery itself is an Odyssey Extreme. I think it's a PC680. It's an AGM battery, so you can mount that any way you like. And I kind of did a modified factory mount from Miata and then made it work with the 7, so it's a little bit modified to work, and that works really well. The fuel system is a custom fuel tank that's baffled. It's just a welded up aluminum bit. It's got some baffles inside. And then I went with a Holley. You can see the number actually on it. It's a 12-130 kit, and it works great. A lot of the 7s have fuel pickup issues. So this includes the Holley Hydromat, which is kind of a big sock that sits along the bottom and sucks up every last bit of fuel. So there's almost zero unusable fuel, which is really cool. And then it's got a Holley fuel pump that's an in-tank fuel pump as well. And it's a 255 pound per hour pump, which is plenty for what I'm pushing. And then a fuel filter as well. And then the fuel, I think it was Tanks Inc. that made the fuel sender, and that works with the speed hut gauge. The speed hut gauge is customizable. It'll work with almost any fuel sender you got. All AN fittings and all stainless braided hose in black, which worked good too. Again, chassis wise, it's a Haynes, and then did the roll bar myself and bought a bender for that. Worked out the geometry, bent up the bar. I do plan to do a race cage as well, and there's some plates inside the chassis that I've already welded with a nut to retain the forward part of that cage. So I'll probably do a forward hoop and then a real roll cage for the track. So that's the overview of the car, and now I'll just button it up and show it to you while it's all put together. Okay, so now it's all buttoned up. Nose cone is what Kit Car Direct and MK call the wide-to-mouth Haynes Roadster. And it has an inlet down there for the oil cooler if you wanted one. And I'm still debating that. I'm going to do some test work before I decide on whether or not I'm going to do that. Equinox is actually who makes the bodywork in the UK. And I believe you can buy it directly from them too. I've spoken with them. Good guys. So there it is though. The bonnet and anything aluminum I built from scratch and used some different materials, 3000 and 6000 series for the floor pan and the side paneling along the tunnel, and then pretty much 3000 for the bodywork in different thicknesses and such, but you guys don't really care about that. But there it is, all buttoned up, and I plan to have a tonneau cover made that'll cover this area that will be black with a white piping just to bring out the houndstooth, and that'll cover that entire area with some quick snaps like the factory Miata tonneau covers use. And eventually in the near future, the plan is to make it all British Racing Green, except for the carbon, and then get some carbon fiber guards for the rear wings, just to tie in the front. So that'll be all green. I'm not a big fan of the aluminum. I know a lot of people are. That's fine, but it's my car. So, but there it is. The next plan for it is to drive it. I'm in Colorado, so a little snow here. And then once the snow breaks, I'm planning on driving it. And the BMW Car Club here has a great autocross series that allows other makes. So I'll be registering in that just because I get a lot more seat time, a lot more runs than like SCCA or one of the other sanctioning bodies here. So that's the plan, is to autocross it and sort it on the autocross track. Once it's sorted, track days. Again, I'm going to build a cage, I think, so that the car's a little safer on the track, but don't feel the need for that on an autocross course. So cage will be in the future as well. I do have to use a clip wiper to get it past registration, but I'm going to see how it goes. I don't anticipate driving this in the rain very often, so I don't think I'm going to add the weight of wipers. However, I wired the switch and bought a billet switch, so one of those 3 buttons on the dash is actually for wipers. The other's for brights and the other's for horn. So there it is. Really, really excited about it. Can't wait to take it to some events and maybe some cars and coffee events and drives. And I've got a couple of folks here that have 7s as well, so maybe some mountain drives. So it's a tribute. I've had people ask, what is it? It's a 7, is always my answer. But it is a tribute to Colin Chapman and the 7. So, it's not supposed to be exactly a replica or anything like that. It's just a tribute car. So it has no commonality other than maybe the lighting with a Caterham or a Lotus 7, but certainly looks like one. And that was the idea. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I'll try to get answers for you. Hope you guys enjoyed the video.